until they came to hopefully a unanimous decision on all three charges.
Well, funny you should bring that up. Are they unanimous on all the charges? Will there be one that they are hung on, and what that might mean going forward? We may be at the end of the road for this retrial today and wrapping up something that began January 29th in 2022, more than 3 years ago, or they're stuck on one of the charges, which would leave the state the opportunity, you would think, to retry on that one charge. We don't know. So we think we're at the end of the road with this trial. But again, Christina Rex saying in the courtroom that it could be about 10 or 20 minutes before we actually hear the reading of the verdict.
Now, one thing is for sure, though, you know, if you are the person in court, this is the kind of jury you want. They want to be sure. They want to be clear about the decision that is going to be made, because this is someone's life, livelihood, well-being. So you have to appreciate that the jury wants to be crystal clear and understand every word and the ramifications of the decision that they're going to make.
You know, the high-stakes case, this is a very high-stakes case. I mean, you know, you're talking about a Boston police officer who has died, and his family who believes that, you know, she is responsible for that and seeking justice. And then you have Karen Reed and her team believing that, you know, that she was the victim of a corrupt investigation and that she's being framed for something that she did not do. So, you know, and she's got her life on the line, too, her freedom on the line. So there's a lot in this case, and you have excellent lawyers. I mean, the lawyers in this case really were, you know, some of the best lawyering that you will see. So excellent lawyers. I mean, their summations were amazing. You know, after you heard one, you were completely persuaded by them. Then you heard the other one, and you were persuaded by that. And, you know, amazing work on both sides. So it's not like the effort wasn't put in by both sides and the jury, as you said. So, you know, there's no shortage of effort in this case to try to come to what is hopefully, you know, a just verdict.
And if there's evidence that every single fact of this case was debated, how about this? Yesterday, they sort of led to gave us a hint that they were caught up on the charge of whether or not she was operating under the influence. Was she drunk driving? And that's one thing that Karen Reed said on tape during the clips that were played in court, was that she was drinking. She never said that I was intoxicated, but she said she was drinking, and yet the jury couldn't even come together on that because there was questions about when the blood alcohol test was taken and whether or not they should be going by 12:45 when the alleged collision happened, or whether they should go by 5 a.m. Every little tiny fact of this case, they went back and forth on.
And it was so interesting that you mentioned the clips, because that was one of their questions yesterday. They wanted to know how much of those video clips really weigh in, right? Whether you're in it and you're inundated because we're in news, we see it a lot, or we're talking about the specials that have been created. I just think that this jury has had so much to really have to remember that they have to base this on the information and evidence and facts they've been given, and not all of the things that they've been surrounded by. But for the jurors to also, you know, ask yesterday, well, what about all these clips we've seen that have been circulating? What about all these interviews, these media interviews? You know, for some, it might feel like she's been on a little bit of a media tour. You know, how much are we supposed to weigh that into our decisions, and having the judge say that those videos are, in fact, evidence?
And, you know, it's unusual to see a defendant in a criminal case, especially a serious criminal case, talk so much, you know, to give interviews and to participate in documentaries and talk outside of court every day. You know, part of you know, the strategy in that case is, you know, there was a gag order in this case, so the lawyers could not speak, both the prosecution and the defense. And so she had the only way to defend herself and to be able to get her side out there on a daily basis was for her to speak. And she did plenty of talking. And so the jury had the opportunity to assess her credibility, to think about what she said, how she said it, why she said it, what her motives may have been. And she basically testified without testifying.
Now, here is an interesting update here, looking directly at Christina Rex's notes here. She has been following this case from the very beginning. We're talking about the first trial and now this retrial. She says here in just the last few moments, Karen Reed says in the hallway that she is feeling anxious right now. The Reed family all hugging in the courtroom. Again, everybody is in the courtroom. Judge Cannone did not allow folks to leave. So they're just waiting for everyone to get in position. But right now we are still waiting for that verdict to be read aloud in court to become official.
Well, you can only imagine the anxiety that she has and her team has, and, the prosecution as well. I mean, they are trying to seek justice, they believe, for the family of John O'Keefe, who, believes vehemently that she's responsible for his death. So, this, like I said, this is a high-stakes case, and there's a lot riding on it. And, the one thing, as we've all mentioned, is that, you have to believe that this jury really did its job and reviewed the evidence and paid attention and, really went through everything to be sure that they came up with the verdict that they felt was appropriate for the evidence.
All right, Catherine, if you're still there, I want to ask you a question that will be very difficult because we haven't really seen this before, and you admitted as much. So they gave over that manila envelope with some type of paperwork inside. We're guessing that it was a signed verdict. The judge had that. The judge put it aside and said they're now back deliberating. So now they're coming forward, according to Christina Rex, and saying, yes, we do have a verdict, and we are waiting now for that to be read. Do they just take back the envelope they had before and swap it out for a new one? It's kind of unclear how this all works now.
But you're right that as I said, I have not seen this before, so I think it's a unique set of circumstances. But I imagine they would fill out a new jury form. They would keep the original forms that were sealed by the judge in the court file, and then the new forms that were given in at 235 or 236, I believe that Christina tweeted that the verdict came in, and those are what would be read to the court. Again, this is a very unique set of circumstances. I'm not sure that how often this happens. I have not seen it, but that would be my guess, that they're not going to be mixing of the forms. There could be some confusion if they were to take the original forms, and maybe that wasn't entirely representative of what the final verdict was. So I think the best and safest avenue for the judge is to take new verdict forms, read those into the court, and keep the old forms sealed and in the record.
And we should point out, because Catherine, you made a very good point when it came to the timeline of this. Because everything happened so quickly, your first inclination was to think that they came and knocked on the door, said they had a verdict, and then a few minutes later came back and said they didn't have a verdict, and then a couple of minutes later, Christina Rex is saying they had a verdict. But what you're saying is that was at the end of lunch. Lunch was ending around 1:30, so they probably did go back for a full hour to re-deliberate. It wasn't like boom, boom, boom. There was a full hour where they went back and talked again.
It seems like that because it also takes a bit of time. When a verdict comes in and the parties, both the Commonwealth is probably in their office and the defense team and Miss Reed and her family are waiting elsewhere off-site from the courthouse. So it takes a little bit of time to notify the parties, get everybody back in. Sometimes that takes, 20 to 40 minutes, depending on where everybody is. So I think by the time we actually saw the first information from the court relative to this, knocking of the door and then knocking of the door again, we were probably a good 45 minutes or so out from when she originally received that information. And then we've had maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So it sounds like probably they had an hour or so after they came to their original decision, reevaluated, maybe had some, worked out some very minor last minute, sort of questions and decided that everybody was on the same page. So we probably had an hour or so between the two.
Ms. Loftus, thank you. We do want to bring in Mr. Jack Lew. He is a retired judge, and we want to talk to him because as I've been listening to everything from Cheryl, from David, from Ms. Loftus, Penny, Rex, I think another thought that I have is what kind of ramifications does this have for other court cases down the line? Just everything we've seen play out, this second trial, the media interviews. Mr. Lew, thank you for joining us.
All right, happy to be here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you talk to us about not only, so this is the retrial, this is Karen Reed's second trial. Talk to us about the way that this retrial has played out. I'm curious about what kind of ramifications this could have for future cases down the line.
The verdicts could have ramifications if the defendant, quote, wins with no major crime convictions. Then it supports the idea that a kitchen sink defense is a good idea. And it also supports the idea that a social media fueled, click fee fueled campaign is a good idea, and possibly that a program of witness intimidation, attempted witness intimidation, is a good idea. If the defendant loses, though, in the sense of getting convicted of any of the upper charges, then it suggests the opposite. A kitchen sink defense is not a good idea, and that a social media fueled, click fee fueled witness intimidation program is not a good idea. And to answer the obvious question, anything except a win for the defendant is guilty of OUI or not guilty of all the other charges. A loss for the defendant is guilty of anything else.
Judge Liu, this is David Wade. Quick question for you. And by the way, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate that. I wish I could have seen your face when Judge Cannoni said that they had a verdict and then they didn't have a verdict. Have you ever, in all your years as a judge, ever heard anything like that?
I've never seen that, not in my 21 years on the bench in Massachusetts as a jury trial judge. I've never even heard of it in court legend. Court legend does contain the following: that the jury returns a verdict in open court, they poll the jurors, and a juror says, no, I do not affirm that verdict. That does occur in court legend and probably in reality. But this, what has happened today, I've never even heard of it in court legend. This case is unbelievable. And if you had seen my face, you would have seen my jaw drop. And instead of 2 chins, I had 3 chins. I was amazed.
Now I wish we had that. I have to ask the control room if we were recording on your Zoom feed at the time.
And I think, what makes this all so relatable is that Judge Liu's response was all of our response. We're sitting here, we're listening, and we're like, all right, we're there. And she's like, wait, not quite, because they came back and said, no, actually, we don't. We were all shocked. We were all like, wait a minute, can this be happening right now?
Judge, could I ask you a quick question to follow up to what you said? Because you used the phrase kitchen sink defense, right? And all of our indications at this point, at least all of the hints at this point, led to the idea that the jury was really stuck on the manslaughter charge. And this manslaughter charge, part of the confusion is there are all these subcharges, including operating under the influence. That was the defense's idea. Originally, the thought process was it was just going to say manslaughter, guilty or not guilty, right? That was the defense that said, no, add all these other little charges as well.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but if it's a guilty of OUI, operating under the influence only, then the suggestion could be that they would have been better off going with the defense kind of announced in court by David Yannetti years ago that this was a tragic mistake at considerable less cost and considerable less money costs and considerable less social costs, because that's an attainable result with this is a terrible, horrible tragedy defense, which is what Mr. Yannetti said way at the beginning. Instead of tearing everybody apart by this kitchen sink defense. But we may just see in a moment that I don't know what I'm talking about, or at least I don't have a crystal ball, and the defense has won.
Judge, it's Cheryl Fiandaca. Thank you again for being with us today. One of the things I know you were talking about with the kitchen sink, I think you were trying to suggest that, they threw everything at this. This was a police conspiracy. She was being framed. There were others that were responsible potentially for this, and she was not the one who caused the death. Is that kind of what you mean by the kitchen sink?
Yeah, the kitchen sink defense is well known to criminal defense lawyers. Decades ago, I'm afraid, I used it many times. And it goes like you keep your powder dry and use every possible defense. At the beginning of closing argument, you state what your defense is. It may be the only defense left, the only credible defense left. The thing they did differently in this case is Mr. Jackson announced the kitchen sink defense in his opening statement. It was a strategic error, in my opinion, but they may still win. But the kitchen sink defense is we have multiple defenses, and some of them even conflict with each other. The example that would express it best is, I did not punch that man, and if I did, it was in self-defense. And I wasn't even there. That's a kitchen sink defense. But when you express all of those options in the opening, that's considered to be a mistake. Usually you keep your powder dry and be quiet about specifics.
So if you were betting at this point, what would you think the jury came back with based on what we've seen for questions the past couple of days here?
Oh, I don't know if I'm willing to bet. I would say after the questions about OUI, it sounded like an OUI-only conviction, a big win for the defense. Now I'm thinking more than, I'm willing to say only for public education that I'm thinking it's more than an OUI conviction, which is a loss for Ms. Reed.
Interesting. So you think it's, I'm sorry, just to reiterate that, you think it's more than an OUI case?
Yeah, why would they take up all of today and part of yesterday if it was going to be an OUI-only conviction, if that was what was going to happen? The problem is this is truly a black box. People, you read crazy things on the internet about what's going on in the jury room. Nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue. It's a black box. We're all just wondering. We can get some indications, but we might as well be guessing who the Pope is going to be based on the smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel.
So, Judge, if it turns out that she is only found guilty on that OUI charge, I think the family, obviously, of John O'Keefe would be very disappointed. But, potential penalty in that case, does the impact of any of these other charges, would that play into anything that would happen in terms of sentencing?
No, the other charges will, I can say with a lot of confidence. I can't guarantee it, but I'm 99.9% sure that if she's found guilty of operating under the influence only, nothing else, they will, the judge will sentence her to the so-called 24D program, which is a loss of license.
Sorry, we have to interrupt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that 12
We're going to go back to
jurors
court and the judge.
Mr. President.
Yes.
May I inquire?
Yes.
Mr. Foreman, members of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict? Yes. Thank you. May I see the papers? Mr. Foreman, have the verdicts been placed in this envelope and have they been in your presence ever since? Yes. Mr. Foreman, on docket number 2282CR117001, murder in the second degree, what say you? Is the defendant at the bar guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you?
Sure.
No. Do you agree?
Yes.
Do all of you agree?
Yes.
Thank you. 002, what say you? Is the defendant at the bar not guilty or guilty?
Not guilty.
Of.
Is not guilty or guilty of that charge or any lesser included charge?
Lesser included.
Thank you. Specifically, number 5, operating under the influence of liquor by operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or greater. Correct?
Yes.
So say you, Mr. Foreman?
Guilty.
So say you all?
Yes. Guilty.
003, what say is the defendant at the bar leaving the scene after accident resulting in death? Is the defendant not guilty or guilty?
Not guilty.
So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you all?
Yes.
Jurors, hearken your verdict as the court records that you upon your oath say the defendant on 001 is not guilty, on 002 is guilty of operating under the influence of liquor, and 003 not guilty. Thank you.
All right, jurors, everybody please be seated. Jurors, we thank you for your service. We're going to send you back. Your service is complete. I'd like to come back and talk to you a little bit afterwards. So thank you very much.
All rise. You call me.
So there you have it. There is a verdict in the Karen Reed retrial. Not guilty of second-degree murder. Not guilty of manslaughter. However, the jury says she is guilty of operating under the influence. And on the third charge, not guilty of leaving the scene of an accident that ended in death.
Commissioner of Probation in writing within 10 days that you do not want these records sealed. To request that these records not be sealed, you may use the request not to seal form, which is posted on the trial court's website on mass.gov. I cannot accept the form here in court. You must submit it to the Commissioner of Probation at the address provided on the form. Please be aware that if the records regarding the charges which you have been found not guilty are sealed, you will be unable to access the sealed record of the not guilty dispositions or any other records regarding those charges. If you want copies of any documents regarding those charges before the records are sealed, you should request copies from the court within 10 days. Do you understand? Thank you.
All right, so we need a date for sentencing. Can we do it next week?
We can. We would be prepared to go forward today.
Okay. Okay.
Now, if you are just tuning in, we do want to let you know about those charges. Karen Reed found not guilty by the jury on second degree, not guilty on that manslaughter charge, but they did find her guilty of the OUI charge. And in that moment, we know you're getting a look outside right now. When this was happening, you could hear inside the courtroom, you can hear the Free Karen Reed chants. So you're getting a look outside at some of the supporters. But what you did also see while this was being read was a very visibly emotional Karen Reed. You could see her wipe tears from her eyes. You could see her hug her team around her. Just a very emotional moment when that was read.
Let's listen in again to the judge.
Okay.
We ask that she be treated no differently, no better.
So I'm happy to do it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
1 year probation. 1 year probation on docket number 002, the lesser included offense of operating under the influence. 1 year probation. Thank you. The 24D program. Thank you.
Immediately. All rise.
Okay, so much was happening there, and the judge saying goodbye there after what has been a very long process. Let's bring in Cheryl Fiandaca again. Again, not guilty for that murder, second degree, not guilty for manslaughter. For manslaughter, but under the subcharge of OUI, she was found guilty. I have never, ever, Cheryl, seen when a verdict is read that you could hear supporters all the way outside of the building.
Oh, it was very, very loud. You could hear them all screaming. You know, they were euphoric. You know, as you heard the judge say, anything that this is a win for the defense, just, you know, being found guilty on the operating under the influence charge, it's the least amount of you know, concern that she had in this case. Penny Commit, who has been following this for us since the very beginning, I think is outside the courtroom.
But before we get to her, really quickly, because there was so much commotion in the studio, not in the studio, I'm sorry, but in the courtroom, the sentence was 1 year probation for OUI. So that's the end of the trial. Her license was suspended years ago, but this is 1 year probation for OUI, and that's it.
Right, and also she has to participate in the 24D program, which is a driver alcohol education program.
Okay.
Just standard practice.
And now we do want to get back outside to WBT's Penny Commit, who has been outside with supporters. Penny, we heard you tell us earlier that the crowd was deflated. That's not the case so much anymore.
Guys, the crowd here is very energized. It's honestly hard to hear as people make their way out of the courthouse. The crowd is screaming and chanting, "Free Karen Reed, free Karen Reed," over and over again. I've seen people brought to tears. I've seen people hugging one another. This was a moment that was a long time coming for hundreds of Karen Reed supporters. Really quick, you were moved to tears, ma'am. Can you tell me why, very quickly?
Just because Karen could be any one of us, and she's been fighting for so long, and she has all this awesome support, and it was just such an emotional moment.
And this is just one of hundreds of supporters that I saw in tears, again, hugging one another, a moment of celebration for Reed supporters out here. I'll send it back to you guys.
You just stand by because Karen Reed just walked out of the courthouse, and here she comes, I think, perhaps, or maybe it's just part of her team. Looking at a live picture now from the courthouse. Let's just listen in for a few minutes. So a couple of people there that we don't necessarily recognize right away.
You're welcome.
Try to fix our camera on the front door. And wow is all we can say.
Yes, we want to make sure that we stay there on the courthouse because we do know that at some point here shortly, she is going to walk out of the courthouse to all of her supporters that have been there, rain or shine, day in and day out. We know
Show the court entrance.
We know supporters have been even moved back at some point, and there were issues.
All right, we don't have a great shot of it, but there it is.
What you're hearing now is just our crew trying to safely position themselves. As you can see here, there are a lot of people. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of excitement in that crowd, and so we're just trying to make sure that we are safely in a spot that we can bring you the moment that Karen Reed does walk out of this courthouse today.
And during the first trial, or after the first trial, they did come out and speak almost immediately. Cheryl, is there a delay here because she has to go and take care of some paperwork first, or what's happening?
Normally, because she was sentenced immediately, sometimes they put sentencing off, as the judge said, how about next week? And they said, we can do it right now. And so they just went forward doing the sentencing. Generally, you have to check in with probation before you leave the courthouse. So I'm assuming that that's what she's doing now. Because she has now a year's probation and test to participate into that driver alcohol education program, which is, part of the standard operating under the influence.
We are just locked down right now on this picture because this is going to be quite a moment. If you thought that crowd was loud moments ago when they read the verdict, if you thought they were loud when we saw some of the extraneous parties walking out as well, just wait until you see the moment where she walks out with her legal team, and we shall see if she comments as well. I mean, she's spoken outside of the courthouse through this entire trial, so I'm guessing that we will hear from her again as well. But this is the climactic moment of something that began, and we should never forget this, with the death of a man on January 29th, 2022, but this jury saying today that she was not responsible for that death, but instead the one thing they could agree on was that she was driving under the influence.
Right, and one of the things I wanted to say about that, just to clarify, because our legal system is unique, I guess, in the sense that there's no guilt or innocence. It's guilty or not guilty. And not guilty doesn't mean you didn't do it. It just means that they couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Good point.
So I think that for a lot of people, who say she was found innocent, she was acquitted and she was found not guilty. And, as we said, we've been watching this high-stakes trial for some time now and watching some excellent lawyering and, witnesses after witnesses testify. And the money that went into this case just to get it to this point, the second trial, streamlined to this time, fewer witnesses. But interestingly enough, very similar in the sense that the verdict that they seem to be deadlocked on, the two charges, the two most serious, it seemed that they weren't willing to convict on those charges of both trials.
And it did almost have us wondering, is this going to be a replay of trial number one when we had these questions and you wonder if jurors can agree? We almost got to that moment until Rex said, wait, they do in fact have a verdict they're going to stick to. You start to wonder, well, wait a minute, could this happen to us again?
Well, interesting, too, you heard the clerk, read the verdict slips, and also he asked the jury, is this your verdict, each person? So they had to say whether or not it was, especially in this case where, we had so many twists and turns and people said, yes, we have a verdict, and we don't have a verdict. So, the security around this courthouse, as you can see with the court officers, there's plenty of police officers there.
And it looks like the crowd has moved closer to the building as well. Let's bring in Catherine Loftus, and I want to apologize ahead of time, Catherine, because if she walks out, we are going to go live to that. You've been covering this. You have put a lot of time and effort into this trial. Tell us what your thoughts are right now. We will get Catherine's microphone. We're just working on that as we look live outside right now. Catherine, your thoughts on what you just saw?
So I think Judge Liu was correct. I sort of echo his thoughts that I'm surprised in that I thought there might be a decision on one of the other lesser included outside of the OUI, only because they've been talking about deliberating, about this for the last, yesterday, half of yesterday, as well as all day today. So to me, in my experience, jurors don't usually take that long relative to a single OUI charge. But, listen, the jury system is what it is. This is our system in America. These are the individuals who are in the best position to evaluate the evidence, to hear the arguments from the attorneys. They see the witnesses testifying on the stand, what their emotions are like, deciding whether they're credible or not. So, I am somewhat surprised by it. I do think the Commonwealth presented a very strong case, but I also think that she has excellent attorneys who are persuasive in poking the holes at reasonable doubt. So, this is what the jury decided, and I think that's, it's fair.
We also have Judge Liu. Let's get a quick reaction from Judge Liu as well, if you're there, Judge.
I'm here. I do have a quick reaction. The jury has spoken. One silver lining for the poor O'Keefe family is that a guilty of OUI is a little better, actually a lot better, for the civil case than a guilty of murder too. To oversimplify, gross negligence, it might not be covered by insurance. That's not exactly the standard, but OUI is definitely covered by insurance policies. I do think that the kitchen sink defense worked, and they held, I'm surprised, but they held the government to its burden. The Mass State Police need to up their game. I just read yesterday, or today, actually, a couple of days ago, about how they have homicide detectives doing details. That does not make any sense at all. And the last thing I would say is there was a ton of attempted witness intimidation in this case. I watched the entire trial live. I did not watch replays. As far as I know, based on the information I have now, there were no witnesses that were intimidated in a big enough effect to change their testimony. So those are the silver linings that I can see.
And Judge, this is the end of the criminal case, but she does face a civil lawsuit, as well as the two establishments where she had been drinking earlier in the night. This is a not guilty on the most serious charges, but she is found guilty on the operating under the influence. How do you see that playing out in terms of the civil case?
In the civil case, she is liable. Who knows about her assets? Who knows what assets were attached and who's first in line? But in the civil case, she is liable. It is my understanding that there are two bars that are defendants as well, and it slightly helps the it slightly helps the criminal defendant and civil defendant that there was this verdict in the civil case as well against the bars, but the bars are not automatically liable because of this verdict, would be my off-the-cuff answer. But she is automatically liable, and the question is, how much is her liability?
Judge, can I ask you a question just for complete clarification, because there's been so much in this case, and I think I just wanted to ask this. Is this case, because we've said the case is over now, right? If you're looking at it and you say she's not guilty of killing John O'Keefe, that's what the jury decide. The case done too, there's no investigation, right? There's no, all right, well, let's go see further if somebody else did it. Prosecution has said all along it was her, that was their claim. So even the investigation is done with, right? Obviously, you can't try her again, double jeopardy. This is what she is guilty of, OUI. But the case itself is also done, correct?
The criminal investigation of who caused his death is over. You want my plain answer. Common sense says that's over. Why waste any time? What happened is they did not prove their case. Yep. And we'll find out later. In this world, we will find out later what the jury really thought. Maybe it's the fault of the Mass State Police. Maybe they need to change. Or maybe it's something else I haven't even thought of. But the investigation of a so-called third-party culprit would be an utter waste of taxpayer dollars.
Judge Liu, Courtney Cole here. Thank you for joining us. Cheryl Fiandaca was talking to us earlier about a really important point, and I think it's important for our viewers to understand that not guilty does not equal innocent per se. And there have been so many people who have been emotionally tied to this. But can you just explain what it means for the jury to have decided not guilty on those two charges?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Judge Lou, I'm asking you.
Okay. Yeah, so the not guilty really just means not proven. I thought you were asking Cheryl. So not guilty just means not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And so let's say you got a charge here. Let's say it has 5 elements. If you're not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt as to just one of those elements, then that's not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and that cannot be a guilty. So every professional media organization in the world is likely going to describe this as not guilty. They're not going to use the term innocent because no, she was not found innocent. She was found not guilty of the criminal charge. I'm going to go out on a limb here again. She's going to be found civilly responsible for his death. I will predict.
And Judge,
if it's not settled long before trial, actually.
Judge, this question is for you, and then I'm going to ask Cheryl to weigh in as well, and then Catherine Loftus, if she's still there. What do you think the fatal flaw was to the prosecution's case where they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was responsible?
Yeah, I obviously don't know, and we'll find out. But it's probably one of the candidates for the fatal flaw would have been, and this is controversial, but I'm going to say it anyways, that Mr. Proctor, then Trooper Proctor, acting in a way in good faith, went too far and messed up the investigation, number one, and number two, didn't do enough investigation. That's the likely culprit.
So sort of that Bowden defense that we talked about last week, where the defense basically says this investigation was doomed from the very beginning. Cheryl, same question.
I would have to agree. That's probably the linchpin of all of it. But there were so many other aspects of this case that were also just odd. So if you were looking at this and, thinking guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, there wasn't anything beyond whatever that investigation was. The collection of the evidence was kind of suspect and not really the way normally people don't, police officers don't collect evidence in red Solo cups and put them in a shopping bag. Even just safeguarding the evidence, the witnesses, the text messages, all of that. And, the possibility that maybe the bite marks on the scratches on the arm were dog bites, all of that expert testimony, then the competing data probably also had something to do with this case.
And Catherine, if you're there.
I'd have to agree with both Cheryl and Judge Lou, and I would sort of second this idea that she has excellent lawyering. I think it's almost less that the Commonwealth had flaws in that case. I mean, and they did. They had the Michael Proctor issue, the issues with Canton Police, the, various civilian witnesses. But I think from my perspective, this is really a sort of representation of excellent lawyering between Attorney Alessi, David Yannetti, Alan Jackson, being able to point out a number of issues that they, were able to say, hey, even in Alan Jackson's closing argument, he said, you might think she's guilty, but if you look at these issues and say, but does it prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And it's a very particular skill set to be able to persuade a jury despite strong evidence from the Commonwealth. So I think it was really a combination of all things put together that brought us to this verdict today.
And now we are still getting a look outside here you see the supporters here on one side of your screen, and we're still waiting for Karen Read to come out and speak to the crowd following the decision made by the jury, finding her guilty only on the OUI charge on this Wednesday.
And you heard the crowd for several years now chanting and holding signs that said, "Free Karen Read." And she will be free the second she walks out of that courthouse. She's on probation for 1 year, but she is, in all intents and purposes, a free woman. So all of those people who have been dressed out in pink, actually been quiet during this second trial as people came and went, using their sign language sort of symbol to say, love you, I think
Yes, I think
that's what it
means.
was.
Yes.
And now they are all just waiting for the moment that she comes out as well. But again, if you're just joining us, odd
here, Boomer. Can
until
you hear
the
me?
very, very end, when the jurors came forward during lunch and said they had a verdict, then came back and said they didn't have a verdict, and then an hour later they did have a verdict. So if you thought this case was strange, it was until the very last second. And Christina Rex, who has been there the entire time, can now actually talk to us because she's out of the courthouse. Christina, you're right there in front of the steps. Tell us what you can.
The judge meets them and they say, we'd like to talk.
David, I mean, I'm sure you're seeing close-up cameras from our amazing photographers and from Penny Shot of the crowd outside here. But the view when you walk out of that courthouse to just see the amount of people that are out here screaming, chanting, those chants were so loud, we actually could not hear the clerk and the jurors get through the rest of the verdict. They had to repeat themselves because the screams came in so loud outside of the courthouse when the verdict slip was being read that it was hard to hear. It was a real moment. I mean, I remember talking to you last time during the first trial when the mistrial was there, talking about how kind of the wind was taken out of the room. It was a really emotional but just incredible moment. I think this tops that last year. I mean, the O'Keefe family clearly devastated, some tears, heads hung. They exited the courtroom before the jury even exited the courtroom. Then the jurors exited the courtroom, and I actually did notice one deliberating juror, a woman by my estimate in her 30s. She was crying when they were leaving the courtroom. So this is emotional for everybody involved. Then sentencing happened, and we now know Karen Reed was sentenced immediately just to 1-year probation for that OUI conviction. And the emotion was there. By the end, it was just, the media, the clerk, the court staff, the Reed family, and lawyers still in the courtroom, and emotional. Everybody really hugging one another. We are keeping an eye out now. We do expect, I'll tell you, everybody has come out this front door over the course of this entire trial. Nobody has been able, or no players in the trial, if you will, have been able to take a back door. So we are expecting to see everyone come out this front door at one point. We just don't know when. There were places inside of the courthouse in different courtrooms and kind of sequestered rooms where both the O'Keefe family, the Reed families, the defense team, prosecutors, all were able to just spend some private time in between jury notes during the trial sometimes so they could be away from everyone. So you imagine everybody's kind of in those rooms right now getting together before anybody comes outside. I did already reach out to the district attorney's office to ask if the DA will be coming here to make a statement or sending some kind of statement to the media about the results of this trial. Of course, again, Karen Reed only convicted on the least included charge, an OUI charge, operating under the influence of alcohol. It was the least possible conviction that she could have received from this jury, and really just what a moment in that courtroom. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any while we wait for them to come out.
So, Christina, we noticed as soon as the verdict was read, you could see the relief on Karen Reed's face, and then she was crying. David Yannetti appeared to be crying. Did you see how much emotion was happening there in the room?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of tears that were shed, you might hear the crowd chanting right now. I'm not even sure what they're chanting. The amount of emotion in that courtroom is indescribable, I would say, because there's that anxiety buildup, the 10 to 20 minutes that everybody was in the courtroom waiting for the jury to come in, waiting for that verdict to be read. You saw that look on Karen Reed's face. That's really like the verge of tears look that we've really only seen kind of in video clips behind closed doors. She usually really keeps kind of a poker face when she's in the courtroom, but you could tell the emotions were high. Everyone was hugging before the verdict was read, and that once that verdict was read, even though it was so hard to hear it be read over the screams of people outside, what a moment. Tears from the defense team, like you mentioned, the Reed family, of course, the O'Keefe family as well. At the end of the day, they lost a loved one, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. This doesn't bring him back. This is not the verdict that the O'Keefe family was looking for, so really emotional for them as well.
Now, I do think it's important to point out that while this marks the end of the criminal investigation, there's still a civil case. So this was a criminal investigation. This part was a victory for Karen Reed, but there's still a next step.
Right, that's the civil case. And, you know, at this point, the civil case that was moving forward, the only thing that the judge stayed in that case is that Karen Reed did not have to testify and provide a deposition while this case was going on. So now that this case is over, she has the conviction only on the OUI, that other case can move forward. As we said, there are 2 bars, restaurant establishments also involved in that case. But Christina, and you know, today you can see the euphoria from her supporters outside. You know, she's been talking every day. I think these folks are hoping that she'll come out and address them for being there all this time and just for staying with her, I'm assuming. Is that what you think?
Absolutely. We expect her team to address this crowd. I mean, the street is shut down right now. There are barricades holding the biggest crowd I've ever seen here back. There's got to be well over 1,000 people here right now. And like you mentioned, you know, the Reed team addressed the media and supporters in the pouring rain last year after a mistrial was declared. So, of course, they'll likely consider this OUI conviction a victory. You know, Karen Reed has been found not guilty on the 3 indictments she was facing. So I certainly imagine they'll come out here and give a statement, which there's been a lot of changes in the last few days because the more people who show up here, the more security plans kind of need to shift. So even the process of Karen Reed and her team leaving court every day has changed. You know, state police have asked the media to stay back a little bit because there's probably 10 times the amount of media that was here over the course of every day of testimony in this trial came here for the verdict, and then well over 1,000 supporters here. So the whole security operation has changed. I mean, you see behind me, there's microphones, there's a podium set up, ready for them to speak. We do anticipate they will make a statement when they come out here. The real question is whether or not you'll be able to hear them on the TV microphones, whether or not we'll be able to hear them live outside with the amount of people out here chanting. It's hard to imagine we will be.
And do you see any supporters for the, you know, the O'Keefe family? I know that you said in the past few weeks that a few have shown up here and there. I don't know if there are any folks out there this afternoon.
Yeah, it's tough to describe, right? So the people who physically show up to the courthouse tend to be the people who are here for the Free Karen Reed movement. If you ask them, they say they're also here in support of justice for John O'Keefe. However, last year, a small, maybe dozen to 20 people in blue shirts had shown up as a counter-protest to support the O'Keefe family. We've not seen that kind of group here. We've seen really individual people over the course of these last few days kind of show up as counter-protesters. But I just want to point out that it's all about who shows up, right? What you see on the cameras, what you see every day when we're walking and we're speaking with Karen Reed, that's because she chooses to go in front of the cameras and make herself public. The O'Keefe family, as is their right, has chosen to stay private, has chosen to not make statements and to really lay low over the course of this trial. Of course, WBZ, we did sit down with Paul O'Keefe, the victim's brother, John's brother, last year, right after a mistrial was declared. But other than that, really, they've chosen to stay pretty subdued. Same with the DA's office. You know, we've reached out numerous times requesting interviews or statements, but there's a gag order in this case that's been on all of the attorneys. And because of that, the only people who've been able to speak out who are really prominent players in the case, it's Karen Reed, because she's not under that gag order. However, the case is done now, and we assume that that means the gag order has lifted. So any of the attorneys could come out and give a statement now as well, prosecutors or defense attorneys.
Now, while it has been very emotional and there's been plenty of excitement here from the crowd that we can see and hear all around you, Christina, kind of give us a feel for what the vibe has been like, because it seems like although they are loud and emotional, that they have been peaceful outside of the courthouse.
That's true. I mean, you know, as happens with a crowd this large, there's been a few minor things here and there, but there's been no major disturbances. And I do want to point out, I mean, the amount of state police, Dedham police, there's a lot of extra police on staff here to help out with security, who have really been kind of keeping the crowds in certain locations, kind of keeping the peace. But it has been a peaceful protest. I mean, many times we've compared this to almost like people who all day were waiting for like a concert or something to start, because people came in the morning. The crowd grew all day, every day this week. They brought lawn chairs, lunch. They were just set up directly across the street is the Registry of Deeds, so it's a public building. And they were just set up there, sitting, camping out, hanging with new friends, and waiting for a verdict. Now that that verdict has happened, the crowd is so big that there's no more room for lawn chairs, and everybody's just really standing in a peaceful protest right now.
Christina, you had a front row seat to this entire trial, and we talked a lot about this week that we couldn't read the jurors' minds, didn't know what they were saying or thinking. I think you have an interesting perspective because you got to watch the jurors and the reaction to different testimony, clips from Karen Read's various documentaries. Was there something that struck you about the jury the second time around? I know you mentioned that they were younger and more diverse. Is there anything you saw during this trial that made you think, I think they may be leaning in that direction?
So I don't want to say yes to the whole jury.
Sure.
I don't think there was ever a moment where I was like, oh, the whole jury reacted in a particular way to something. But there certainly were certain players. I mean, there was one man who's one of the older jurors. I would say maybe in his late 50s, early 60s. He smirked a lot. That's the only way I can describe it. And always on cross-examination, right? No matter who was cross-examining. Cross-examination is really when the fireworks, the sparks kind of fly. He was always kind of smirking, looking back, forth, like he was watching a tennis match whenever cross-examination was happening. So he's someone that stuck out to me. Another person was a younger lady who I'd say was in her 30s or so, who sat in the front row, curly-haired woman. She had a bit more facial reactions to some testimony. And I do remember some tense moments in the final witness of the defense's case with Dr. Rentschler from ARCA, when Hank Brennan was cross-examining him. There were some tense moments where she actually looked up and she shook her head, like, just like that. And, you know, you just wonder, what is she thinking right now? That is the same juror who I just saw with tears in her eyes, who appeared to be crying as they left the courthouse just now, or left the courtroom just now, I should say. So less of a overall they were well behaved. I know that's an odd term to use, but really kind of muted. And then there were little moments here and there when you really noticed particular jurors and their reactions to certain testimony. But I will reiterate, a young jury and a more diverse jury than during the last trial.
And Christina, you know, I know you just graduated from law school. You'll be studying for the bar exam soon. So you did get a front row seat in this case, which is, you know, really phenomenal. You got to see some amazing lawyering. What did you think about why you thought that the jury sided more with the defense in this case? What do you think the linchpin was for them during the course of this trial?
I think it was the choice of approach the second time around. You know, the first time around, even though the defense has no burden of proof of anything, the first time around, the defense really tried to prove a theory of the case, to prove what they believed happened. That didn't happen this time. I mean, you heard the same statement from Alan Jackson in opening and closing, 6 times total. There was no collision, there was no collision, there was no collision. That ended up being the centerpiece of the defense's case, really focused on discrediting any prosecution expert witnesses, discrediting any expert testimony that had been done, discrediting the investigation, and discrediting even the victim's injuries. So I think that really is what kind of changed things the second time around, is the defense's different approach. Here they come.
Right here.
I just want to say 2 things. Number 1 is I could not be standing here without these amazing supporters who have supported me and my team financially and, more importantly, emotionally for almost 4 years. And the second thing I want to say is no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have and my team. Thank you.
So do you want to see it reopened? Aaron, you want to see the case reopened? the case be reopened? No, the case cannot be reopened.
Alan,
This case is over.
No, I mean, the case is searching for somebody else. What does this say? This is what it's saying about justice.
I'm going to leave it to Karen. And her dad. Her dad has a comment. Let her dad make a comment.
Mr. O'Keefe, what does this
Thank
say
you,
about justice?
Mr. Reed. I want to acknowledge the strength of our daughter Karen, the support of the entire Reed extended family. I want to acknowledge the greatest team of attorneys. Our first one that we found was David Yannetti. We added Alan Jackson and Liza Little. Bob Alessi, you know about. All right? It was a fantastic team, but we needed them all to defeat this. We thank everybody for their support from the heart. We love you all of the content providers who help spread the word. Thank you so much. God bless you all.
Investigation.
Let's do this.
You've been watching CBS News Boston's coverage of the verdict in the Karen Reed trial. She is the woman charged in the 2022 fatal hit and run that killed her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. She was found not guilty of second-degree murder and manslaughter, but was found guilty in the third charge, operating under the influence of alcohol. The judge sentenced Reed to 1-year probation after the verdict read. Reed says she is being framed by a police and a cover-up. This is the first case. The first case ended in a mistrial. We have been seeing quite a scene play out outside that courtroom in Dedham, Massachusetts. More than 1,000 people were out there cheering when Karen Reed exited the courthouse. You even saw pink confetti. She went up to the microphone and she thanked her supporters, and she also made a point of saying no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than she did. Again, Karen Reed was found not guilty on murder and manslaughter, but was found guilty of operating under the influence. I want to bring in trial attorney and legal analyst Robin Nunn, who has been watching this as well. Robin, what a scene outside that courthouse. Just first of all, what do you make of this verdict?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Karen Reed verdict tells us something powerful. Juries won't convict on serious charges unless every piece of the puzzle fits. And they're not afraid to question the integrity of an investigation when there's smoke around the process. I think that's what my biggest takeaway from this is.
Yeah, and let's just remind our viewers, prosecutors said that Reed she had been out drinking with her boyfriend, and then they said she backed into him with her SUV and left him to die in the snow. Her defense argued that the whole case is a frame job and a shoddy investigation by police officers. So kind of walk us through, how did the jury come to this decision?
Yeah, I think it all boiled down to the prosecution had a very high burden, proving not just that Karen Reed was intoxicated, but that she backed into her boyfriend and left him to die. The defense didn't really have to prove who did kill him. They just had to prove that there was reasonable doubt that she indeed actually did that. And clearly, quite frankly, there was.
I mean, emotions were running high. We were listening to our CBS coverage in Boston. A reporter who was in the courtroom said they could barely hear the verdict because the cheers from outside were so overwhelming. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, I have not. I think it's because the defense actually did a really good job as a defense attorney. I give credit where credit's due. And I think they introduced this alternate theory of a police cover-up, which really cast doubt on the investigation itself. And that narrative really resonated, and it took over social media, and the community really bought into it. And when you see something like, especially after misconduct allegations emerged against the lead investigator, who was eventually removed from the second trial, it just really spun out of control, and the defense really did a good job of playing that up.
I want you to compare this trial compared to the first trial that ended in a mistrial. What were some of the key moments this time around that made a difference?
Yeah, I think that they really kind of honed into their theory with this second retrial. Obviously, they cut out the lead investigator, as I mentioned, which I think was a huge blow to the prosecution. I think the jury would have to notice that the lead investigator is no longer a part of this. I think they obviously had the dog bite expert, right? And that was, another kind of sensational, testimony. They brought experts who really could cast doubt into the prosecution's case that it was her and it was a car and that, she indeed backed into her. I mean, I think there were a lot of good highlights. I think this was really lawyering at its best. And I thought that it was a really tough trial and hard fought.
Robin, the criminal case is over, but there is still a civil case. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Karen Reed's acquittal in a criminal court does not prevent the O'Keefe family from pursuing a civil wrongful death lawsuit. And the legal standard in civil court is much lower. All you need is a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. That means even after a not guilty verdict like we see here, she could still be found liable in the death in civil court. This all may bring up, memories of the O.J. Simpson trial, for instance, right? Where he was acquitted in criminal court, but later found liable in wrongful death in a civil trial. The same thing could happen here.
All right. Robin Nunn, thank you so much. We're going to go back to our CBS station in Boston for more of their coverage. Let's listen in.
What she said, but of course we did hear her on the steps of the courthouse. So we're done here.
We're done here. I mean, we were hoping that we would be done and there would be some finality to this case and that we wouldn't be looking at a possible third trial.
What?
So this case did end.
We're about to swap batteries, guys.
Not guilty verdicts.
Again, Karen Reed was cleared of manslaughter and murder, but was found guilty of operating under the influence and sentenced to 1 year probation. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
What happens when reporters take you inside the story?
I've been asking for over a year and a half for access into this place, and this is the first time we're getting it.
You get the all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
This is CBS.
This is NCIS. You put on that uniform, you agree to protect the person next to you, no matter what. Welcome to Australia.
Match made in heaven.
Watch out! Hey, hungry? Shout you a crock burger.
NCIS Sydney. All episodes now streaming on Paramount Plus. Returns CBS Fall.
I'm Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours, and of all the cases I've covered, this is the one that troubles me most. Listen to Murder in the Orange Grove, the troubled case against Crosley Green, wherever you get your podcasts.
Be in the know, even when you're on the go, with the CBS Mornings podcast.
Some news you can use at the grocery store.
Better mornings start better days.
When you look good, feel good, you do good.
That's right.
Listen to CBS Mornings on the go on Apple Podcasts.
What happens when the world's best journalists come together?
Write a prescription for the healing of America.
We're retired and this is our paradise.
Now it's gone.
You get the stories of America every night. You get the all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
I can only describe it as evil.
Follow and listen to Train to Kill, The Dog Trainer, The Heiress, and The Bodyguard on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
My job can get dangerous sometimes, but I'm very good at what I do.
I know you're scared. I'm here to help.
They said you were the best.
Your daughter hired me to bring you home. I made her promise I would never stop looking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You hear about the reward?
Come in.
Okay.
Tracker, all episodes now streaming on Paramount Plus and returning CBS Fall.
As President Trump weighs U.S. intervention in Iran, Iranian officials warn that the U.S. involvement could lead to all-out war in the region. CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Keeley joins us now. Courtney, thanks for being here. Sources tell CBS News that Israel has not asked the U.S. to join in this war. We're also seeing Iran's supreme leader say his country will not surrender and U.S. intervention would bring, quote, irreparable damage. What exactly could that look like for the region?
Well, right now the question is, does the Iranian regime speak for the Iranian people after 5 days into this with airstrikes and people having to flee Tehran and be in 10-hour long just traffic trying to get out of a city after they were told to flee. So the Ayatollah Khamenei did invoke the name Haidar, which is referring to the first imam of Shia Islam, which connotes courage and martyrdom. It was a real cry de corps trying to rally the Iranians. Whether the Iranians actually will rally to the regime or not remains to be seen. The big diaspora of Iranians outside are often outside because they want this regime change, but people inside right now are being subjected to these pummeling attacks, having to flee and often having nowhere to go. What really matters right now is who has what in terms of weaponry and who can continue this and for how long. Can the Israelis outlast the Iranian barrage of missiles landing on them? Can Iron Dome protect them? So many right now white-knuckling through question marks rather than actually having answers.
Courtney, now, while Israel is the U.S. closest ally in the Middle East, Russia is Iran's. What sort of complications does this pose for the U.S. when considering joining the conflict? And how does Russia's backing Iran support the country's posture in the region?
Well, you asked me how this affects the region, and a year ago I would have given you a very different answer, because a year ago Hezbollah was still in place and powerful inside Lebanon to Israel's north, and to its northeast, Syria was still controlled by Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is now in Moscow. Hezbollah has been pretty much decimated, even though the longtime deputy, Naim Qassem, is in charge. But we're not hearing or seeing any responses really from Hezbollah. Syria is in different hands now. Russia does not have that kind of land bridge, Lebanon through Syria into Iran. And Putin has cautioned in a phone call with President Trump, exercising caution and wanting to get to more of a negotiating table. Russia is in a completely different position, and so are the regional proxies than they were before. And then also Iraq, which has a Shia-led government and a Shia majority, it really wants to take care of its own country these days, not devolve into all the violence that they had endured over so many years.
So much has changed. Courtney Keeley, we appreciate your perspective. Thank you. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported today that overnight Israeli airstrikes hit 2 Iranian centrifuge facilities. One of Israel's stated goals for its current offensive is destroying Iran's ability to build a nuclear bomb. So far, attacks have targeted Iran's above-ground facilities, but one of the sites Israel views as critical to destroy is hundreds of feet underground. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Faint joins us now to explain why destroying the underground Fordow facility is a key mission for Israel and what tools could help. He's also the managing editor for the Modern War Institute at West Point. Charlie, thanks for being here.
Fordow is part of a handful of sensitive sites that are essential for Iran's nuclear program. As you can see on this map, there are several represented here, south of Tehran, the capital. Fordow is the largest and most important one, and the one that we're going to discuss here briefly. Many of the other sites have already been successfully attacked by Israeli forces, but Fordow has not. One of the reasons for this is that, as you see in this build, that Fordow is heavily protected. It is deep in the mountains, hundreds of feet underground, where it is very hard to get after this sensitive site. This one in particular has been declared by the Israelis from the prime minister on down as essential to taking out as part of Israel's strategic war aims. So we suspect that we'll see some type of action on this in the very near future. One form that this action may take is in the form of this, which is the massive ordnance penetrator GBU-57. As you can see from this slide, this is a massive weapon. It's 30,000 pounds, it's more than 20 feet long, and it's designed to go into a target and blow it up from the inside versus surface bombs, which hit the surface and blow outward. This one's designed to go deep into the ground and explode out. So for purposes of comparison, a standard penetrator bomb in what we call the bunker buster family might be either 2,000 pounds or 5,000 pounds. This one is 30,000 pounds. So it is so big, there's only one platform in the world that we know of that can launch it, and that's the U.S. B-2 bomber. So right now, we don't know if that